All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to Coding Temple's Agile Leaders, where we help you develop the skills and strategies to increase velocity and innovation in growing technical organizations. I'm your host, Evan Chai. Today, we are joined by Oji Udezue, the recently Chief Product Officer at Typeform and formerly Head of Product for Creation and Conversation at Twitter, the CPO at Calendly, and formerly Head of Product at Atlassian. Thank you so much for being here with us, Aji. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's also Black History Month, and so we should have this conversation.
Fitting and timely. You're on the totally different hemisphere right now, and it's early in the morning by you and evening by me. So I appreciate you making time for us.
No, of course, it's my privilege.
You've had quite the journey, incredibly diverse experience. Every time I read one of your articles or watch one of your videos, 2 hours later, I'm in a deep rabbit hole trying to integrate your wisdom into our strategy. So I appreciate all the stuff that you do, the work that you put out there for everyone. But maybe for the few in our audience who aren't familiar with you, would love for them to have a better understanding of your journey, maybe to more recently.
Before Typeform, well, I was Chief Product Officer, I was at Twitter, and I had the privilege to lead the conversations team and the creator team. And the problem we're trying to solve is to get more people to create more interesting things on Twitter, which was what would drive our growth. And so this was the tweets team, the DMs team, audio spaces, and a lot more. Also, some B2B things like content partnerships, NFL, HBO, all these premium content providers, and ad technology, because we would serve their content and do some ads and share the revenue from the output. Before that, I was Chief Product Officer at Calendly, Head of Product at Atlassian. If you go way back, there's a startup. I consider it a failure. I learned a lot. And then there was Microsoft. And if you go back further, there's a PhD, master's PhD in EECS, and a lot of research into computer science, especially high-speed networks. Led product teams and engineering teams, but also marketing teams. Done a lot of inside sales, strategy, especially in the B2B space. And I love what it takes to build successful software companies. I'm curious about it.
Do you think that you experiencing the amount of success that you have as a product leader required the diversity of experience that you've had leading up to this point, or do you think unrelated and there's a more efficient path to product leadership?
Yeah, I think it's unrelated. Let me give you an example. My partner is very similar education, similar EECS background, and she's had a lot of success. I think my path is just curiosity. I like to experience different things, and so that's what's driven my path. If you have to boil it down, I don't know if that's the biggest. There's certainly people who are very focused, and sometimes focus actually pays off quite a bit.
Similarly, I went a PhD path, ended up leaving for one of my startups, but did it in protein metabolism. So it's across a number of different industries. So similarly, I followed my nose and curiosity throughout my career, but not a ton that I'm using from protein metabolism to the CEO of this organization.
Not yet, but it's
Yeah.
coming.
Can you give us a sense of, as a chief product officer of organizations as rapidly growing as Typeform, what your team looked like, what the day-to-day looked like, just so we can orient ourselves around that role?
I'll talk about teams. Being a chief product officer or head of product is a growing role because it's becoming more important to the revenues of the company for someone to think about the product. Your job is with partnership with the CEO and the C-suite. Your ability to manage a team effectively, your own team specifically, which is usually product managers or maybe designers, and an extended team of cross-functional partners that you might not directly manage. You still have to exert influence over what they do, right? Because the product is usually at the center of most things for a software company specifically. It's also your ability to set direction. People call this strategy, but where are we going? What are we doing with all these resources and talent? And then your ability to execute on that direction through people and teams, yours, but also other ones that you don't command directly. And you only do that indirectly. So these four things, your partnership, talent management, direction setting, execution are what you're trying to optimize through all your time, your one-on-ones, your group meetings. Day to day, it feels like a lot of meetings and a lot of work to course correct future outcomes. What you're trying to do is collecting signals so that you can predict where the future is heading. If you think the signals you got are a good outcome, then go for it. If it's not, if you're seeing signs of smoke in the machine, and you use the next meeting, the next month, whatever, to course correct it. And so it's a loop, a predictive loop that you're trying to do through
Sure.
just living day to day. One of my former bosses calls half the job is communication at that level. Half of it is to say things and write things that herd people in different directions. I remember Steve Sinofsky. He was the president of Windows and he office at Microsoft. You can imagine a gigantic organization.
Sure.
And this man would blog and write just like the product process, how we ship, what we do, right? And then we'd have the big all hands meetings at the stadium in Seattle about where we're going in Windows. So there's a huge amount of communication going on. And so it's a very important component.
I think that's one of the most, and it sounds like you, at least one point in your journey, were at a startup, assumingly a pretty small team. I similarly have spent a lot of my career in kind of these smaller teams to 100, 200 or so. And as you move up in the organization, it seems increasingly you're moving away from this kind of sure strategy, but also executing, right? You're running up and down the organizational stack to exactly to your point. It's like setting strategy, activating the best people to execute against that strategy, and then holding people accountable to executing that strategy.
No, I love that word you said, activate. In a big organization, if you have the right talent management, you're going to find people who can do execute and people who can set strategy.
Okay.
And you just have to have good arguments with them and decide what it is.
Yeah.
But maybe the hardest thing is to keep everyone aligned. In physics, well, you want a vector quantity and not a scalar quantity. You want an organization that's a vector, everyone pointing in the right direction. And unfortunately, or fortunately, this is still a human endeavor and it requires communication. It requires inspiration. It requires people to know exactly what they're doing and how to color in the lines when it's unclear in the right direction. That's why communication is key. There's other things clearly, right? But
Sure.
that's a big component.
No question. And I will admit, I underestimated the inspiration piece of it, but it's not enough to just articulate things. We need to inspire action.
By the way, these are the secrets of leadership that people don't understand really well. Articulation is not enough. Inspiration without execution is also not enough. But inspiration matters. You know why? Because we're still human. And every organization we're in is a social construct. And humans obviously need to be paid and live and get rent and so on and so forth. Humans prefer to be inspired to do shit,
Totally.
right? That's basically it. And
Totally.
so inspiration is so important.
Totally. And the things that we're asking people to do are challenging and they're going to meet friction in the real world. They need to believe and have a sense of ownership over what has been communicated or articulated.
Correct.
In a landscape that is changing as rapidly as the one that we all find ourselves in right now with things like artificial intelligence, how is the role of a chief product officer changing? Is there pressure to be more technical, or how are you interfacing with the engineering organization? How's the role evolving?
I'll break it down. There's been a lot of economic pressure in the last 2 years. We went from cheap money to expensive money. So many companies went from chasing growth to profitability and sustainable growth. This happens all the time. This happens in the tech industry. So in the last 2 years, CPOs have been pushed to focus on the short term versus before we were focused on the long term to figure out a place where we can grow faster customers and revenue trajectory. So shorter term financial performance over longer term growth has been a thing in the last couple of years. Prioritizing non-scalable things that have quick return to the bottom line. And this has been a change of orientation for chief product officers. Hopefully, the next generation will know how to play both games, how to be a wartime CPO and focus on the short run, but also how to think about integrating the longer term growth as well. Many companies have different capitalization. Some are private equity who have short term horizons. Some have conventional capital. Some have bootstrapped. And I think there's also a lot of pressure to figure out an AI strategy. A lot of people are just like sprinkling AI fairy dust on what they used to do. We know that AI can unlock more valuations. The last 2 years have the pressure has shrunk valuations. AI is another way to expand them. People are trying to figure out how does AI work, and maybe we'll talk about it later about why that's important to do it right. Now, there's some pressure to compress the technology and the product roles. CTPO is what people are calling it, Chief Technical and Product Officer, and so on and so forth. Most software companies are basically three layers, right? There's software and technology at the base level, and usually that's the CTO. And there's the product, which is an abstraction above the technology, which is the customer experience. And then there's the business, which is the CEO. That middle layer is usually the chief product officer and the CEO, plus the operational cadence and so on. Now, the pressure for unifying this has always been there, but it's getting more intense because your CEO doesn't usually understand the technology unless it's a very small company. They take recommendations and they try to figure out if they're making the right decision. Or they get better advice if they can compress the bottom two into one person who can be accountable if they have the experience. So there's some pressure to unify the technology and the product layer. I think these are some of the things evolving the CPO role. So it's getting more popular, but it's also changing based on economic pressure and simpler reporting lines.
That feels spot on in terms of the articulation, and even in smaller organizations, sitting in a CEO role, and I've had situations where we've had CTOs effectively, in a lot of ways, operating like they're running product. The product, or ultimately the solution you are delivering to customers, should be guiding or determining the technology that is being utilized. If that gets flipped at all to where the technology is running ahead without necessarily a central orientation around the customer's problem and challenging things happen, and you can lose the foundation a little bit.
Technology staying ahead
Yeah,
is only useful in a small fraction of software companies.
yeah, I agree.
It's usually a waste of money. Even Microsoft in the 80s figured out product management. They did Office for the Mac as a total disaster. And there were weird dialogues. There was no customer experience, just entirely engineering led. And the
Yeah.
fact is, we are in the third age of technology, the age of utility. There's no surprises. Everything is passe. And so the only thing that matters is the customer experience. It's like a light switch. You turn it on and light comes on. Does it work for me? And so in that world, think about it. Let's give you an analogy like the consumer goods industry. Does anyone talk about the fact that Frito-Lays are made in some fancy machine, the technology? No one cares. Do they taste delicious?
Yeah.
That's all that matters.
Only
Look, I'm an engineer, right? And I have a lot of respect for engineering, but like technology, product, and business is a concentric layer. These are layers of abstraction. And the business should guide the product should guide the technology. Is really what it is. If you have that out of sequence, you can't build a very valuable software. If you are building fundamental platforms, if you're OpenAI and your product is a large language model, go nuts on technology. But even you notice that the reason OpenAI is ahead of the pack is they're so good at product. They had a model for a year and it didn't become successful until they wrapped it into Chat GPT. I was on stage at Dev Day, and I've been on stage at OpenAI's Dev Day. And the thing that kept knocking in my mind was, holy shit, this is just like Microsoft Div, which is where I worked before I left Microsoft. They are product focused. They have this LLM stuff, but that's not the secret weapon. They know how to turn it into new developer patterns. They know how to turn it into APIs that are convenient for people to access. And that makes all the difference. The code in the raw LLM, sure. Making it accessible to developers, giving them patterns they can use to build new kinds of apps, that's the advantage.
Sam Altman's leading Y Combinator for years probably formed a worldview and a lens where it's product focused, building solutions, building things that people ultimately want. And you feel that kind of being carried over in the product leadership at Open, at least from my perspective.
100%.
How do you think the team structure, and it might be too early to see how this plays out, but when you think about the product and tech, how do you think AI impacts the kind of anatomy of the teams? And then we'll get into how that might impact leadership style in terms of product leadership.
Yeah. It's always important to differentiate between what should change and what shouldn't change. One of the things that I try to bring to product management is a knowledge of history, a knowledge of anthropology, and how people have done these things in the past. Management is a very old skill and discipline, right? Just think about wars and generals and statecraft. That's all management, really. And that's been around for a very long time, meaning that it won't really change fundamentally. The tools can change even as we go from age to age. It just gets refined and we use different tools. So, what AI is specifically is different tools, not like a fundamental shift in how these things are done. And so, what you'll get from a management perspective specifically is like different signal resolution, like management
Mm.
analytics is going to get better. You will know in real time maybe how your employees feel. You will know better in real time who's not engaged. There'll be more ways to reach you so that you can help people. You'll be able to find talent better, more signals and so on. But leadership and management will remain remarkably consistent in how it's delivered. We already talked a little bit about the inspiration. So I don't think some of that stuff will change, except some of the tools will change. In terms of skills on the team, I believe that that will change fundamentally. In fact, we're going to invent new areas of skills that we can't even name today. For example, one of the things I expect to be important is AI user experience. We're going to break new ground on how people interact with AIs, right? I don't believe chat is enough. In many ways, AI is just a human. And how do you communicate between humans? It's language, it is text and chatting. But it's not going to be enough. Humans, we're not going to give up high resolution screens because our visual cortex is by far our biggest superpower. We will still need simpler ways to just click and tell things and make things go. Just press buttons because it takes fewer calories than to type out a whole thing. So AI user experience is going to be a thing that is going to have to be reinvented, and I'm super excited about it. One way to think about AI is like a permanent human level intelligence available to all your staff to make their work better. It's like a virtual android, if that
Yep.
makes sense.
Yep.
And so the work for leaders is to encourage and train their people on how to use this virtual android better. The changes in the skill sets are going to happen.
I love that. So, to double click a little bit of your product perspective will be fascinating here. So when you say move beyond the chat interface, your meeting's multimodal and it's not limited to this 2D environment. It's potentially interacting with you in space. Anything beyond that, or is that what you're describing?
No, I just mean that for the last 2 years, the main interface to AI has been prompts.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people think prompt engineering is the future interface, and I don't believe it. I also don't buy voice. You could get on your phone right now, be talking to someone, and be checking Zillow or ordering from DoorDash. If you're talking to your phone, you can only do one thing at a time. You can't be
Sure.
like flipping screens. Multitasking is such a basic thing. I remember when Windows kernel went from cooperative multitasking to more deterministic multitasking, and we're all like, this is the future, the fundamental change. Voice is good, but it has some limitations because it forces single tasking. What I expect is that the interfaces will become hybrid and they will focus on specific use cases. Sometimes you don't want to talk, you just want to swipe. Swipes are very efficient. Why are we going to give that up? You see what I'm saying? People are making these predictions. I think it's going to be multimodal depending on the use case. Some of those things that we think we're going to discard are still really good. The spatial stuff, I don't know anything about it. We've been working on spatial computing for a very long time, and it hasn't worked. The question, if you're a product person, is you have to ask yourself why. What is the human computer interaction that's failing? And if you can answer those questions, maybe you can do a better mousetrap. We can't just wake up and say, this is going to be the thing. No one cares about your bright idea. What do you know about anthropology?
Yeah. The spectrum of things that will be considered, everything from very creative, different ways of thinking about products and how we experience them, to the hard skills and technical skills required to build and architect those experiences. It implies a whole host of new skills that are going to be required in our organizations. When you think about teams just at a high level broadly and new technologies, how do you try to manage the balance between upskilling existing team members and or bringing in new talent from the outside, or maybe not just manage that but optimize that balance?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it makes people nervous, right? Because this is like the thing behind this question is always like, do companies care about me? Will they invest in me? And so on and so forth. But I think there are two, maybe a principle, but also a trend that I want to highlight. In general, I think that you have to, when you, people don't do this often, when you have a job that needs to be done, it's always useful to ask yourself, what are the skills required to do this job? What is the domain knowledge required to do this job as you spec out? And also think about what does success mean for the job,
Sure.
right? Because sometimes people just think of people and jobs as the same thing. No, you should describe a job and then you should think about a person that sits in it, whether they fit that perfectly or not. What is the skill component and what is the domain knowledge required? If the skill component is much smaller, say 20%,
Sure.
then you should teach it, because the person knowing everyone in the business, knowing all the conversations, knowing all the history is super valuable. And so if the skill component is small, then you should absolutely not get a new person and you should teach what's required. The other thing is that maybe this is a longer term trend. The cost of information specifically is trending to zero. You can get an MBA set of knowledge today without going to Kellogg over in Chicago. The problem is usually the motivation and the discipline to actually get through it. Turning information into knowledge is actually super hard. But the cost of information is basically zero. And so, what does that mean for us in a world of AI when we could all eventually have human level intelligences beside us at all times who have a copy of the internet as their brain? Is that a lot of knowledge and training will become just in time, because you it's like having the abacus versus the calculator. We don't use the abacus, we use a calculator, and part of the calculator is so we don't have to do math in our brains anymore and we think about the implications of the math. AI will be there to give it to us in a practical way, in an experienced way when we need it. We will focus more and more on training skills when we need it versus trying to hire for it like a whole 12 years of it. I think that we're going to do that more and more for sure.
I love that. AI is going to be able to deliver the just in time and personalized curriculum or content.
Personalized, contextual,
Like,
everything.
I think it's the application, it's the kind of on the job training simulation experience that starts to get um, interesting in how do we optimize that part. There are ways that AI can augment some of those elements as well, but it's endlessly fascinating. When you think about,
Let me tell you something. What does experience do? Experience increases pattern recognition. So if you can find a way to remove the downsides of lack of experience, which is make fewer mistakes, and there are ways to do it with AI. Not easy, so I don't want to denigrate skill and experience. If you can do that, you'll be able to do more with training, period.
we create on the job training, simulated experiences, putting teams together with real people, cross functional teams, building real products, solving real problems for actual customers. But we're doing it in a safe space that the consequences of making mistakes aren't as pronounced. We're trying to accelerate the years of experience into 3 months or so. Some interesting things there, but exactly to your point, trying to provide that experience into more accelerated, efficient time frame.
That's definitely a deframing strategy, and it's not perfect. Conditions change. That's the definition of an internship.
Yeah, yeah,
That's the definition of all the things that we do today to mitigate that before
totally.
people do things that will cost $1 billion mistakes. So
When
yeah,
you
no, totally.
when you think about the tech industry, you think there's been an overemphasis on tech skills over other management skills when it comes to leadership level roles. So engineering managers, product managers, or higher. What has been your thoughts from that perspective?
I think yes and no. I didn't appreciate managers who had no management expertise whatsoever. They were just promoted into those things that they thought that was way to succeed. And what I focus on in my career is to make a path for success for managers and non-managers so you can choose. You don't have to be a manager to be the highest paid person. In fact, when I was at last year, the highest paid people on my team were not even managers at all. They opted out. One dude said, Oji, I'm never going to manage. Just you do it. I'll do the thing. So, and I was like, sure, I can do that. And so leaders should provide a path of success for leadership and non-leadership. So individual contributors who can be essentially VPs if necessary. I think that helps, right? It helps the industry focus on management talent specifically and leadership ambition and acumen of the management criteria. Because leadership and management are different things, and we conflate them too much. But content, it matters. Think of Intel. Andy Grove is one of the four people coming out of Rothschild's semiconductor. He knows how to run a fab. It makes sense that he's the manager, maybe despite his management acumen, because if he's not the manager, you're going to blow $1 billion in a fab that doesn't work.
Sure.
And so our industry focuses on content because it's important to be the manager who knows the thing that's happening. And the downside is you might not be naturally be very gifted at it. Smart leaders, what they do is they have the person be a leader and then they pair him with a good manager. Ray Dalio used to call it two in a box.
Yeah.
It's like you don't have one person who has a complete picture. So why put pressure on one person, put it on two people? And
Well
they
said.
have different disparate skill sets. Our industry requires a lot of content, but I should be more flexible. We should absorb management skills and lessons from other industries that have figured out how to work this out.
When the skills are less defined and things are evolving in front of us, how do you foster a culture of innovation and adaptability within your product teams, especially as things are unfolding like we're seeing now?
Yeah, this is something that I think about as I resort to rhetoric and reinforcement learning, which is a word from AI. The job is communication. So in a world where skills are changing and criteria is changing, my job is to spot the patterns that are appearing and then to encourage people towards the right pattern in order to deal with the next challenge. Like when AI became a whole thing in B2B SaaS last year, I was stressing out. I was like, how do I don't know, I don't even know how to hire an AI team,
Yeah.
product managers and engineers. Like we can't do this thing. We just had a riff. There's maybe not enough AI content to redirect a whole team. So I was like, stressed out about this. And so what we decided to do, I'm not gonna, again, sometimes you're still figuring this stuff out, was to create a community of practice. In Slack, there was an AI community, and I encourage people to join it. And every day there will be news about what's happening in the world of AI, practical things, code snippets. I encourage people to become makers, make their own stuff, and post it in there. And so you get this upward spiral of encouragement, of challenge, of gamification, where
Yeah.
people want to do more and learn more. And then within that, pepper in encouragement. Oh, this guy wrote this piece of code, and that was amazing. And so,
Yeah.
so another person writes an even greater piece of code so they can get the attaboy. And so I call it rhetoric and reinforcement learning. Encourage everyone. And then sometimes if people are exceptional, you promote them. If you promote them, everyone is like, shit, okay,
Yeah.
this is how to get
That's
promoted
what I
under this regime. Let's do
yeah.
it. I have to say that it can be slow. Sometimes you just need to go higher for what you need because you want to be fast. But
Yeah.
there are ways to nudge an organization in the direction you want, for sure. And that's what management and leadership is.
I could talk to you about product, AI, the industry, and all sorts of other topics for days. But let me ask you as a last question, looking forward, what emerging trends do you believe will significantly impact product teams, whether it be structures or strategies in the next few years?
Yeah, man, that's a gigantic question. I feel like I've already failed. I'm gonna get an F, but I'll give it a shot. I think we really need to get better at remote work. Remote work is never gonna go back into the bottle. I'm 100% convinced. But also, I feel like the pandemic era tools are so terrible. They're not cutting it. You literally have to have stack up on remote at a philosophical level to get it right. And I also feel weirdly that we are not adding to the body of knowledge on how to do it better. InVision was the bulwark and it. Atlassian is good, but all you have is just blogs. We need to have remote work practices be advanced 10% every year until it's perfect. So I think that's huge. Longer term, I think humans are going to transcend location, personally. Remote
I'm,
work has to change.
that's all I'll say. But go ahead.
I think AI is coming for us all. Even like 2 years ago, I would sit with like high school students trying to do engineering, and my whole spiel will be what are the 30-year trends like AI half-heartedly, but then I would say like autonomous driving. I'll talk about clean energy. Because if the world solves fusion in a way that is open source, then we evolve as humans. Basically, we become at least interplanetary if that is solved, assuming we also solve climate change and we don't destroy ourselves. But I think that AI is coming for us all. There's okay, like autonomous driving is going to be a big deal. Energy evolution is going to be a big deal. Figuring out how to cool the planet is going to be a big deal. Space is going to be a big deal. But maybe the biggest deal will be fusion on the energy side and AI. That will be the biggest deal for Homo sapiens, I think. So we can't fight it. It's jujitsu. Use its energy to be in harmony with the universe. For products, AI will be at the core of every new software business. AI will be at the center, the kernel, right? And then there'll be UI around it, just like we have a kernel and it has kernel mode and user mode. There'll be UI around it and other logic will hang out the center. I think that's how software will be built. And any software that's not built like this, I think will be obsolete in 10 years. And I don't even think there's a good example of that yet right now, except perhaps OpenAI specifically, which might be our first $10 trillion company ever. My prediction. I wish they would let me invest. I think that a lot of the knowledge worker tools will turn over. Working in the future of workspace right now is going to be quite lucrative for venture capitalists and for founders. They'll be able to deliver the same thing that's better at much cheaper rates, I believe, over time. Those are some of my predictions. If you get rich off of them, send me, give me a little, throw a little job my way.
I'm right with you. It's an exciting time. I could see why it would maybe be disconcerting for some people. Quoting Ray Dalio, we need to embrace reality and deal with it. Within every obstacle or challenge, there's an opportunity to improve our condition. This is a monumental opportunity for us to do that. Yeah.
This movement or this thing is going to exacerbate inequality initially and maybe permanently. We're both black men. And the fact is, it's so hard to find people of color in technology. What that means is that the skills, if you had to say, okay, there's 100 people who are Caucasian, 100 people who are Indian, 100 people who are like South Korean or whatever, sample the planet and say, how many of you know how to build a software company? You're going to get various percentages, right? The knowledge to build AI right now is concentrated in a few OECD universities, basically, and maybe some Asian universities. And it is a non-trivial thing because some of these people have been working at this for 40 years. And so catching up to them is not easy. This knowledge is not spread evenly around the world.
Sure.
It's like nuclear physics in the 40s. It was only in Germany. We even had to, the US had to literally hire a bunch of Nazis to work on the space.
Yep.
on the
Yep.
space program,
Yep.
right? It was crazy. And if it was well spread, they wouldn't have had to do that. They'd have just gone to Kansas University and not have to muck around
Much
with
less
Nazis.
problematic. Yeah, totally.
You see what I'm saying? So I'm saying that it's not well distributed. Progress will be concentrated in certain places to the detriment of others, or to the relative competitive disadvantage of others. It will replace jobs, at least initially. And we don't have the political system to deal with that, right? It'll
Yes.
cause dislocation, political upheaval. No one wants to implement like a universal basic income to deal with that. We have aging politicians who have they have no clue of how to deal with this stuff. So my prediction is that it will start being chaotic initially. We don't have the systems to deal with it. And it will take people of vision, people with courage, to bend it into a place where it's good for the entire species.
Mm, mm,
That will take work because people could bend it in the other direction and take complete advantage because of their relative advantage right now. The good news is that we have language to have these conversations. Now, it takes all of us to say, there's a better world we want. And us that know how to use this thing, who have a platform to talk about these things, will nudge it into the good direction. And that's super
so
important.
I love that ending there. And we obviously are spending every day thinking about how do we create a platform to talk about it and for other folks to get experience with it and develop skills in it, and maybe even particularly folks that haven't been able to engage in some of the
It's part of it.
practices we talked about.
Encourage everyone. I make everyone take a pledge. I will get good at AI. Just do
Yeah.
it. Okay?
So,
Yeah.
100%. Aji, thank you so much for your time today. The wisdom is invaluable. For those of you watching, make sure to check him out on LinkedIn, which is a good kind of central source, but also I'll be providing a link to his book, Product Management for Product-Led Growth. So I'll make sure that link is in the description as well. Aji, thank you so much for everything you do, my man.
Thanks, Evan. It was a great conversation. Like chopping it up with you.